So Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Really looking forward to it. So I've never actually told you this, but I've had the pleasure of being in your accelerator programs. We've met a few different times, but a mutual friend of ours is a guy called James Sinclair. And 5.5 years ago, I went and sat down with Jimbo, who's a mate of mine. And I said, I'm thinking about getting into coaching. And I've got sort of these ideas. And he goes, there's a few people that I think that you need to have a look out for. And he said, there's this guy called Nick James and Dan Bradbury. He said, this guy called Beju Solanki and this guy, Daniel Priestley. He's phenomenal. He's phenomenal what he does. And his dad as well, who I think he learned everything from his dad, is a phenomenal guy. And out of all of those people, so I've known Nick for years, worked with Nick, I worked with Beju, I worked with Dan. It is almost as I've left the best till last in terms of working with, and I worked with your dad for a few years as well.
You worked your way through the list.
Okay, work my way through. And yeah, just want to say a huge thank you really publicly to everyone, because having been part of the Dent program, it's been phenomenal for me. And I wanted to get you on the show. As people that listen to this regularly will know, I'm obsessed with finding out what's the difference that makes the difference. How is it that people think? What's the mindset shifts that they have that enables them to do the things that they do, whether that's achieving great things or whether it's overcoming adversity. And I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into that today. So
yeah, likewise. Really good.
So one of the things that I've always found fascinating is where people get their drive from. And you've written a number of books, which we just mentioned. And then one of them, which I have here, one of your more recent books, which you co-authored with Jodie Cook, called How to Raise Entrepreneurial Kids. Now, I don't have kids, but I read it anyway. And what I think is really interesting is that you're one of the few people that I know that is successful in lots of different walks of life, but that I also know their dad as well.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested, because one of the things that you guys talk about in the book is where people's entrepreneurial drive comes from. And we're going to hear about yours in a moment, but most people ask the question, or a lot of people ask the question, can anyone be an entrepreneur, or is it something you're born with? So what's your opinion when it comes to entrepreneurial?
I think there's certainly an element that people are born with, and there is certainly an element that is developed. And let me explain that. So the element that you're born with is that there are different personality types that kind of emerge pretty young. I've got 3 little kids, and each of my kids, I don't know how it happens and I don't know where it comes from, but each of my kids have got a very distinctive personality. They're very different. They're just instantly, they exhibit different traits, different extroversion, different, sort of ways of handling conflict or handling disruption. They're different kids, right? And it was almost like you can see it from as early as sort of 6 months, 12 months. You can see that personality coming out in different ways. So think of it like this. Oprah Winfrey would have made a very, very terrible software engineer, and Bill Gates would have made a terrible talk show host. If we take, Richard Branson would have probably been, a pretty average fund manager doing investments, and Warren Buffett would have been pretty terrible at running an airline or a student magazine or a music label. So there are certain personality traits that are different. But the good news about entrepreneurship is that there's so many different businesses. So there are successful entrepreneurs who have got, finance businesses. There are successful entrepreneurs that are entertainers. There are successful entrepreneurs that are inventors and super creative. There are successful entrepreneurs that just execute brilliantly and run, really detailed businesses that require a lot of systems and processes. So there's all these different types of entrepreneurs. You could pretty much name any trait, and I could find you an entrepreneur who's successful, who's got that trait. So the part that is born is that you have to find something that suits your personality. Oprah Winfrey had to find being a talk show host, and Richard Branson had to find the music industry, and Bill Gates had to find software. So there has to be a good fit with who you are and what it is you ultimately try and do. And if you just try and copy someone else's strategy and it's not a good fit for you, that's going to be a recipe for disaster. But then ultimately, the skills of entrepreneurship are learned skills. You know, no child even knows how to control their bladder, let alone do a financial forecast or pitch an investor. So there are certain skills that you have to learn. You have to learn how to pitch. You have to learn how to productize. You have to learn how to publish great content. You have to learn how to hire some people and encourage them to join the team. So all of those are the skills that you've got to learn once you've found the thing that's a good fit for your personality. So I think there's obviously a bit of both there, that there's one thing, then the next thing.
I love what you've just said there in the respect of that. Yes, anyone can do it, but it's about doing what fits for them and making that work, not trying to be someone else or just. And I suppose that also comes down to what people's perception of what an entrepreneur is, because lots of people have these visions of what an entrepreneur is, and you put sort of quite nicely in the book how if you were to ask a child what does a fireman do, well, that's fine, they've watched Fireman Sam, they know that. Or what does a policeman do, well, they know that, or a nurse or whatever. But what does an entrepreneur do? You know, and I love that. And what I think is beautiful is I respect you for many reasons, and one of them is not just your success in business, but certainly my perception of the type of father that you are, and the way that you explain to your kids what you do is just phenomenal. Would you mind sharing that?
Yeah, so I'm very protective of their mindset around what the world of work looks like. So when my kids ask me what do I do, I tell them that I create things, that I have fun conversations, that I put together games. I create games. I tell them that I teach things, I learn things. So I kind of rattle off all of these kind of things that I try and relate to what they might understand. I tell them that I write books, and that's one thing that I do. But I never ever say words like I have to go to work. I don't want them to think that going to work or doing work is something that you have to do, or that it's horrible to do, and that the only reason I'm doing it is because I have to do it for money. So I always say I get to go to work today, or I always say I'm really productive right now. I don't say I'm too busy. So I'm really in a productive mood right now. So I'll come down soon after I'm finished being productive. Little silly things like that probably change perception. And sometimes I'll say I'm going to go and do work, and they'll say, well, why? I'll say because I love work, and I love doing work. And they go, oh, okay, fair enough, right? Like, I guess you meant to love work. When my son asks me, how do you make money? I say, well, there's so many fun ways to make money. Sometimes you can find some and it's just lying around. There's lots around. I say, sometimes you can create something that you really love creating, and then someone loves it so much that they want to buy it off you. Sometimes there's a job that someone else doesn't want to do, and you can do it for them to help them. So we talk about all the different ways, but we basically, I've certainly bought his art off him, and I've bought. I once paid him £1 to write me a song, and perform a song, because I want him to have in his mind that there's lots of fun ways to make money, and it's not about doing chores. That in the big wide world out there, you could write songs, you could create art.
And I think that when I read that in the book, I was that kid at a young age that went out and washed cars, and I looked on eBay of what stuff was selling for, and found the local paper and see if I could sort of match deals and do that kind of stuff. But I didn't think creatively in terms of what could I create until at that age. That wasn't. It was what junk can I sell? What chores can I do for people? What neighbour's grass can I go and cut? But what like I say, for me, it was selling. I realized selling quite early on. And a lot of my friends joke about the stuff that I used to sell. I sort of had a bit of the Del Boy, what's the word? sort of
Nature
profile,
tendency
yeah,
profile. Yeah.
of when I was younger. But hey, I didn't have the jacket. Maybe that's where I went wrong, having the sheepskin jacket. So let's just talk about where people get their entrepreneurial drive from, because again, you had quite an influential entrepreneur in your life.
Yeah. So at a very young age, I had an entrepreneurial experience, which was pretty amazing. Which was some things in the house were damaged due to a small fire in a kitchen, which filled the house full of smoke, and there was smoke damaged things. And I made a deal with my parents to clean them all and to sell them in a garage sale. And I was only 10 years old, but I went round to the neighbors and asked if they wanted to put anything in my garage sale. And I was encouraged to make a phone call to the newspaper and to ring up and place an ad for my garage sale. And basically, I made enough money to buy a bicycle, a BMX, and a Sega Master System. And that was pretty amazing. There was this moment that happened where one of the gentlemen came up and said, "Can I talk to your dad?" And he said to my dad, your son has priced this microwave at $20. Will you take 15 for it? And my dad said, "It's not my garage sale. It's his business. You'll have to ask him." And he walked off. And and it was like this, wow, it's my business, right? I'm in charge. And there's a real moment of feeling empowered, and kind of, I think that was a magical moment. At a later age, I worked in a small business, a family business. When I was 13, I took a job working for a very small business entrepreneur. I then worked in McDonald's, and I got a chance to get to know the owner of our McDonald's. He owned 6 McDonald's. Each one was doing about $2 million worth of revenue. And, I knew that he had a big boat and a big house, and that he never ever came into the store. It just was a money factory for him.
I've got to say, sorry to take off tangent, I've got to ask you to share the proof that you're in McDonald's by sharing what's in a Big Mac.
2 all beef patties, lettuce, 2 all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions, all on a sesame seed bun.
There we go. There we go, ladies and gentlemen. That is a man that has definitely worked in McDonald's.
I can go beyond that. The grills are 188 degrees on the bottom and 216 degrees on the top. There's 53 nuggets in a bag. The toaster's at 215 degrees setting. The cheeseburgers are allowed to stay in the production bin for 10 minutes. I can still remember all this stuff. I can still remember the 6 steps of service on the front counter. Like, the training was awesome. It was absolutely awesome.
I love that. Well, I'm going to send this episode to a friend of mine. He's Lisa Dunnington. Her husband is Nigel Dunnington. I don't know if you know them, but he used to be the COO of McDonald's Global. They've got many franchises that they own in the north of the country. So I'm going to send her that. She'll be impressed.
She will.
So sorry, I interrupted, but the McDonald's.
Yeah. So there was McDonald's. At the end of my school year, I started planning an underage nightclub party, which was my first real kind of risky entrepreneurial venture. I rented a nightclub, which was a pretty big move. I met with the nightclub owner and general manager, and I hired a pretty well-known DJ and all of that. I was 18, just turned 18, and basically set up a party that ended up making about $10,000 in a night. We had the local radio station sponsor the naming rights of the party in exchange for $4,000 worth of radio ads. And, I ended up running 6 parties that year and making, tens of thousands of dollars on the parties at 18. So I kind of got all of those things. And I guess to answer your question, where was the drive? The drive was a couple of things. Number one, the excitement of it, the belief that you could create stuff, that you could make stuff. So there was definitely the carrot, and the carrot was the energy, the excitement. And then there was the stick, which was, when I was growing up, my dad eventually became an entrepreneur and a business coach. But when I was growing up, Dad was a teacher on a fixed income, and Mum was a journalist on a fixed income. And essentially, I remember them kind of very much having to budget and having to, make difficult decisions around money, because when you're on a fixed income, you've got a set amount that you have to work with for the year, and you've got to make sure that your expenses all fit within that. So there were certain things where I noticed that they wanted to do things, but they couldn't afford to within their fixed income. Now, obviously, that changed as Dad, became more of a business coach and trainer and consultant, and he had more of the ability to impact his income. But I do remember clocking it pretty young that I would much rather figure out a way to make as much money as I want, as opposed to budget whatever someone tells me I'm allowed to have.
Yeah, and again, that's why I asked that question. Is for me, it was the same, and I think it's the same for many people. I mean, for me personally, I've got two uncles. One of my uncles is a billionaire, very successful, from literally all self-made. He started selling T-shirts. He was in the paratroopers, then started selling T-shirts on Venice Beach, and then has become one of the most influential people on the planet in terms of stuff that he's done. And then my other uncle, again, he always jokes he had 74 PAYE jobs before he got into business, and then started doing his thing. But my dad did okay. They had a fixed budget, and then the story, if people want to listen to it, is in other podcast episodes. But it was that constraint that grew my desire to not want to have those limits of being able to I wanted to be able to buy the trainers that I wanted. I wanted to there was a particular Burberry cap that I wanted when I was younger once, and I couldn't get it, but all my friends could because their parents gave it to them. So I went out and I earned the money, and it's just that not having those limitations where so much of this creative genius gets accessed, I suppose.
I think too, it's a technology thing, or it's a societal thing. You got to, you and I are probably born around the same time. There was a particular shift that happened with personal computers and obviously the internet, but also just even there was a shift around just having a printer in the house where you could print up a brochure, or you could kind of create something, you could make something. As long as I can remember, pretty young, there were computers around and you could type something up and print it. And we take that for granted. But actually, it was only a decade earlier that if you wanted to print something, you had to go to a typesetter who would, say, come back tomorrow and I'll have you have whatever it is you want printed. It's very, very difficult. You had to, it was a rare thing. And I think there's something that changes in the psychology when you grow up around the idea that, it's no big deal to just come up with something and produce something and see it all happen. And I think there is just a shift in psychology. A lot of people are going through an entrepreneur revolution right now, that they're letting go of careers and starting businesses. And they sort of think, break out of the school system and all of that sort of stuff. And I say, well, the school system served us really well for hundreds of years. But there has actually come a point where the technology has given rise to the ability to go and start a business that's more lucrative than a job. But it's only recent. It's only really in the last 10, 15 years where that's a really viable alternative for a lot of people. It's not really the school system's broken for a long period of time. It's probably the school system's broken for the last 15, 20 years. But actually, it's only very recently that you can be an entrepreneur quite easily.
And yeah, like you say, even if you think of certain opportunities that are whole industries now that 10 years ago just didn't even exist. The amount of online businesses, online didn't even exist however many decades ago, and there's whole industries now that are built on that.
Well, my grandfather, he ran a factory. He was a general manager of a factory that produced copper cables that the power lines that go along the streets. And his factory used to have, when he ran it, 140 employees in order to produce that copper cable. Today, that same factory is still running, and I've heard that it has 8 to 12 people there. And essentially everything else is completely automated. And it used to take 100 people to produce something, and now you can produce quite a lot with 10 people.
Well, something that we've just been using a fair bit these last couple of months is Clubhouse, right? $1 billion valuation. It's got 12 employees or something, or 8 employees. It's like ridiculous. So no, I find it fascinating. What about role models though for you? So like say for me personally, I had someone extremely one particularly wealthy person and then another very wealthy person that were my role models that I could look to very easily and be like, yeah, I want to be like that. And it was within reach because they were knocking around of what they went on to do. But what were who was the, I mean, you mentioned the McDonald's owner, but who was the person?
There was a moment that happened in around 97 where both my grandfather and a family friend passed away, I think within 3 months of each other. And my grandfather passed away at age 66 with emphysema, and Jim passed away at age 70 on his 70th birthday, actually. And so both of them died roughly the same age. And my grandfather's story was that he had run a factory for 40 years. He worked for one employer. He started out as an apprentice, worked for one company for 40 years. He had never really traveled. He had basically retired with about $1 million, which he then put into a scam. And he 6 years later, he'd lost the whole amount and he was completely broke. And then there was Jim, who had been this amazing entrepreneur. He had imported suits from Savile Row into Australia. And then he had come up with the photographic finish for horse races, and he licensed the photographic finish to the horse races all over Australia. And then he was involved as one of the promoters to bring the Beatles to Australia. And he just had all of these different businesses that he did. And he also got himself involved in a business venture that went badly, and he also died broke. And what was really interesting to me is that I had this experience of seeing two men about the same age who had both had about $1 million and died broke, except for the one thing. One had taken very, very slow path and no risks and no travel. The other one had just traveled around the world and taken risks and highs and lows and hung out with the Beatles and all this kind of stuff. And I just it kind of slapped me in the face that it's like, wow, it's entirely possible that you can do everything right and everything safe and still die broke, or you can have a total roller coaster and still die broke. And I just kind of looked at the two men and went, if all things being equal, I kind of would choose the roller coaster, and actually, see what's out there in the world. And I remember that kind of cemented things for me. And I really, between seeing those two, I really thought, I want to take this more risky path, this path of adventure and travel and all these kind of things, and taking risks and trying to create stuff. So that was a big driving force for me.
I love that. So Jim was a big, obviously your grandfather as well, but Jim particularly was the I suppose gave you the vision of what was possible. All right, without dying broke, hopefully. But
he passed away right in the middle of a campaign. He was running something called the South Pacific Songwriters Competition, where 10,000 people from all over the Asia Pacific region were writing songs and submitting them for judging, and then he was having these concerts. But he passed away right in the middle of a campaign, and he had hundreds of thousands of dollars out and invested and in venues and all this sort of stuff, which unfortunately he passed away at the exact wrong moment. And his family had to work really hard just to kind of break even and get the whole thing together. But I'd spent time with him, and I'd done little bits of work with him to run one of his previous concerts that he was running. And it was just so cool to see him pulling things together. And he was a very flamboyant man, and I just remember thinking, that's so cool.
So it's all Jim's fault. So I want to, I've got to ask the question. I'm just curious. You mentioned the book about certain business tapes that you used to listen to with your dad in the car, but you didn't mention what business tapes were they. Do you remember who the tapes were?
Yeah, so there was a set of tapes by a guy called Paul Dunn.
Paul Dunn.
Yeah, he had something called Results Corporation. It was called the Results Corporation. And he had a very distinctive voice. So he would say, what your business needs is it needs to sound like a wow. And he would do these kind of really, he'd kind of do these things. And we'd drive around listening to calls to act. You got to have a call to action. You've got to clarify the marketing message and all of these kind of things. And I was like 10, 11, and 12. When I was about 12, I saw Tony Robbins on the TV in the early morning, and there was these tape sets that you could buy called Personal Power, and there's Tony Robbins, choose your destiny. I'm thinking, oh, I'm only 12, but I want to choose my destiny. And anyway, I jumped onto the bed and said, Dad, I got to come in. You got to buy these tapes, these Tony Robbins tapes. And Dad ended up saying, okay, let's go halves in them, and you've got to earn half the tapes, which was really smart because he got buy-in from me. Do I really want them? Will I value them? And because I had to pay off half of them, I listened to them all. So between 12 and 14, it was like goal setting and, the avoidance of pain or the moving towards pleasure and all of these kind of things that Tony would do. And it was, so it was that kind of stuff.
Tony's got a lot to answer for, that's for sure.
He's had a big ripple effect, that guy.
He sure has. So let's talk about now, right? One of your many companies now is called Dent, and there's good reason for that. Why Dent?
Well, Steve Jobs famously, in a Playboy magazine interview, they said, they said something about you've got big vision, you got big plan, you really want to change the world, because he was talking about computers changing people's lives and empowering people. And this was at a time when computers really were things that large corporations and military and government had. And he was talking about the personal computing revolution and how people would be able to have access to computers, and it was like a bicycle for the mind. And they said something like, oh, you've really got a big vision. And he said, an entrepreneur should try and make a dent in the universe, or else why even bother? And they ran that quote, and that was one of the standout quotes that he was known for. And I loved the idea that you should try and make a dent in the universe, or else why even bother? And what he meant by that is you should try and solve a big problem. You should try and advance humanity in some way. You should try and do something meaningful, or else, if it's just trying to sell fish and chips, or do another mechanical repair or another little IT job, why bother? So he was saying, set out to make a dent in the universe, or else don't bother. Do something else. And I loved that, and that's why I actually named the company the night that he passed away. So my company used to be called Entrevo, and no one could say it, spell it, or remember it. It stood for Entrepreneurial Revolution, and one of my top clients used to say it Entrevo, and I'd say Entrevo. She'd say I would say it's Entrevo, and she'd go, no, it's Entrevo, Entrepreneur Revolution. So it's Entrevo. And I'd be like, oh, we can't even agree on how to pronounce the name. So I slowly didn't like the name of the company because people were struggling with it. And then Steve Jobs passed away in 2011. And I remember I logged onto the Apple site to look for some products, and it popped straight up, Steve Jobs, 1956 to 2011 or whatever it was. And it was just that they just put that up on the site, and I just remember getting hit by it and just sort of feeling a real wave of sadness. And then I rang Glenn and I said, oh, Steve Jobs has just passed away. And I said to him, I one day I want to have a company called Dent to make a dent in the universe. After we sell Entrevo, after we, sell that company, I want to start a new company called Dent. And that was in the back of my mind for about a year, that my next company would be called Dent. And then there was a day where Glenn said, at all times, we should be putting our best stuff into all of our energy, and all of our best should go into what we've got right now, not worry about what comes next, put everything into what we've got. I said, well, that means we rename the company Dent. And he went, I love it. Let's do it. So we renamed the business Dent, and we said, let's put all of our best stuff into the business today.
Wow, there we go. I didn't know that it was on. I don't want to say it now. I'm getting it wrong. But Entrepreneur. But I also did the same. I made the same mistake. So I called my company originally Willican Limited, and Willican was one of my favorite quotes. Is I can, I will. So I thought sort of Alan Sugar had Amstrad, which was his initials. Amstrad, Willican, Will's my name. I'll do that. And everyone goes, will I can. And I was like, oh, that's it. Let's change it to make it happen, but I never knew about the name change. I knew you had sort of triumphant events, but I didn't realize it was I can't even say
No.
it. Case in point. Cool. So, so you want to make this big dent, and you've certainly been doing that. Like I say, you've been a huge inspiration. Do you know something that's fascinating about you? That I find fascinating, at least other people might not, but I find fascinating. I've worked with a lot of people that are coaches. I'm constantly researching and learning from people. Not once have I ever heard anyone say a bad word about you. And obviously you get lots of people that talk about have an opinion, have a really strong opinion, be really ranty, be this, really. You've got very strong opinions, and you're incredibly intelligent, and you've done some incredible work, but no one's ever said a bad word about you. I think, and that's just testament to your character and the person that you are.
Well, that's lovely. There are a few 1-star reviews on my books. If you want to see
those pesky haters,
if you want to find a few Daniel Priestley haters, there is a few 1-star reviews on my books. There's one there because I don't reference enough. There's not a good bibliography in the back of my book. That got a 1-star review. There's someone else who does not like the fact that I use my own business as an example because it's just a sales ploy for my own business. So there's a couple of negative ones there, but on the whole, I really do value reputation. So when I've had disagreements with people over certain things, I've always tried to ask myself, well, what would the high ground be in this? How do you take the high ground? How do you be the bigger person and just settle it? And sometimes someone, I've had situations where people have gone through the entire accelerator and then said, oh, I need a refund for personal reasons. It's like, oh my goodness. There's certain things where I've just always said, I'd rather make the investment in reputation than fight certain battles that are not really worth fighting. So that's probably paid off in good reputation, hopefully.
I think there's a powerful lesson in that, and what you've just said is that you've thought about the long game, really. Of what's the reputational risk? What could this do further down the line? Let's take the moral high ground and roll with that. So
I had a speaker that I used to promote once who had a very nasty falling out with a girlfriend, and she orchestrated over 100 blogs from anonymous sources, which it later came out that she had written all of them, but she wrote 100 blogs about his character, him being a bad person and all this sort of stuff, and it decimated his business. It was impossible to work with him because anyone who Googled him found 100 blogs saying that he was a bad guy. And essentially it all came from a romantic fallout. But I witnessed that fairly closely. And I really hammered in the idea that in the digital age where things don't disappear and they actually come straight to the surface thanks to Google, you really do need to maintain a nice, clean reputation and good relationships with people.
Yeah, no, I think that's so true. So on that, I mean, it's very easy for 5 books. I think it's 5, including this, maybe even more now. Obviously, lots of different businesses. What most people regard as significant success. Like I say, no one's ever said I've certainly never heard anyone say a bad word about you. All those different things. What's been one of your biggest challenges?
I would say the challenge of balancing personal and business. So the inconvenient truth for me, Will, is that if I was a single man with no kids, I would love nothing more than to work 60-hour weeks every single week, right? So my natural tendency is belligerent and myopic focus into things. I love, when some people hate the idea of working hard and they want work-life balance and they want to have like this, they imagine that the perfect scenario is sitting on a beach and having a laptop and working 4-hour work weeks and all this sort of stuff. Strangely, I personally love the idea of spending my time kicking doors down, chasing after big goals, getting up early and just being a belligerent, myopic, single-minded, solely focused man on a mission and, recruiting people. And, that's kind of who I am. And then, I've gone and, I have a family. I've got 3 little kids, and I've got, a lovely family and lovely home, lovely relationship with my wife. And probably one of my hardest struggles is trying to balance that tendency of like wanting to get into that rhythm of just work, and actually balance that with wanting to also be a well-rounded human being and being a father and being a husband. So that's definitely a struggle that I have, because I do have this natural kind of tendency. If there's work to be done, I want to do it. Like if there's work that could be done tomorrow, I want to do it tonight. Whereas most people think, oh, wouldn't it be great to watch lots of Netflix and and all of that? I'm kind of like, okay, dinner's done. Let's write a book.
And that I can almost imagine that's exactly what you think. Right, where's the next opportunity, and where are we going with this? And
it's hard to kind of it's that's a challenge to balance that out.
And what about failure? And people talk about there's no such thing as failure, only feedback, and you learn and you grow. And you mentioned sort of name changes and various things in your business. But what's been one of the biggest professional challenges where you're like, oh my God, like really, is this happening?
2008 was definitely that. So I had a business that was doing £4 million a year, very profitable, brokering deals where I bring speakers and products into the UK market, and I tour them in the UK market. So Dr. John DeMartini, I brought John to the UK and ran the first breakthrough experiences. And I brought Roger Hamilton in and ran the wealth dynamics programs, the profiling tools, and The Secret came out, and I brought Bob Proctor in and ran a 2,500 person event with him in London. And I was kind of doing these deals where I'd bring people and software and companies and products into the UK market, and specifically into London, but I was doing Manchester and Birmingham, Milton Keynes and London. And anyway, business was going great, about 15, 16, 17 staff, 4 million a year of revenue. And I remember we had this event with Dr. John DeMartini, and the whole financial system collapsed, and the pound collapsed against the dollar. It was almost twice the dollar, and I owed him $70,000 worth of speaking fees, and that was £34,000 or £35,000, and suddenly, just in a matter of a week, it was like 55,000. So like it was just suddenly it was an extra 20,000, and that was the beginning of that. Like that was the very beginning, the first thing that happened, and that was like, okay, we can weather that. That's fine. But then it just went tumble, 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 tumble. John basically said, and he's not coming back to the UK. He's going to focus on his home market. Roger got into issues and decided that he was going to focus on Singapore and Bali. And suddenly my 2 biggest products disappeared overnight. So I didn't have product to sell. And then I tried to create new stuff, and no one wanted to buy anything in 2009. It was basically, you go out and talk to people and say, oh, do you want to do a personal development program in 2009? They're like, no, the whole world's collapsing. I'm not going to do a personal development program or professional development or anything that's non-essential. So my revenue dropped from 4 million to 400,000 in 1 year. So it was 90% drop. Most of the 400,000 was collections, like just collecting money that was outstanding. And I had to fire everyone. I moved from a massive penthouse apartment in Chelsea into my sister's spare bedroom, surrounded by boxes and files and all of that. My girlfriend at the time got diagnosed with bipolar, and she was extremely difficult as a relationship, and it was very, very difficult to manage the very high highs and low lows, and it was accelerated by what was going on around. AKA she had hooked up with someone who had a penthouse apartment in Chelsea, and now she was with someone who was in a spare room. And then right amongst all of it, slipped on a sheet of ice and almost broke my arm, and was just in a really, really tough, bad way. And it was just horrendous. It was basically, I'd hit before the age of 30, I'd millionaire, and then bang, all come crashing down very, very rapidly. And it was like it was like physically emotionally, relationships, business, all of it just crash all in one year. Whereas the year before I'd thought, hey, I got this great situation with my girlfriend. I got this great house that I live in. I've got this great business that is amazing. So I thought I had everything. And then fast forward 1 year later, and everything that I thought that I had under control, boom, the whole lot. And then, I remember the slipping on the ice was like almost the nail in the coffin, where I just thought, what is going on? And I hit a really dark patch, of just thinking everything is going badly at that particular time. So yeah, I mean, that was one particular time. I had another particular time where one of my business partners owed me over $1 million worth of commissions. And in order to try and avoid paying the $1 million, they launched a bogus lawsuit in the courts to try and delay having to pay me the $1 million. And I had to make a decision: do I want to fight a court case or just walk away from $1 million? And I decided that my energy and my time was worth more than $1 million. So I just walked away from it. So there was, I've had some of those.
So this is what I think is interesting, because a lot of people, they don't know that story about you and some of the stuff that you've gone through. What was going through your mind? What was your thinking? So when, like I said, the first domino was the change in the currency rate. I suppose the lesson there is hedge. But there are lots of lessons that come out of it. But
that's actually exactly what John said. He said you should have hedged. I'm 28 years old.
That is exactly what John would have said as well. Look, hindsight's a wonderful thing. But what was going through your mind that meant that you got yourself through that? Because there'll be people listening to this right now. Obviously, we've just had COVID, that are in their own version of that tough time right now. But what was going through your mind that kept you going?
To be honest, I felt very trapped in it. I didn't feel that I had options. I would have loved to have run, but I was tied into leases, and I was tied into employment contracts, and there was just problems that I felt that I couldn't even run away from. I mean, theoretically, I could have just gone to Bali and disappeared and just said, well, to hell with everything. I'll just never go back to the UK again. And all of those things. And I probably, in the darker moments, I probably thought of that. I probably thought that was an option. I'm pretty happy about it now, right? Because things worked out in the end. But I was pretty dark place at that time. I remember the Christmas party in 2008 was a huge Christmas party, followed by all of us getting on a plane and going to Japan for snowboarding. We were riding high. And then the following year, the Christmas party was myself and the 2 remaining employees sitting around this dingy little dark restaurant, basically talking about what we'd witnessed over the last 12 months of just, the whole collapse of everything. So I felt trapped. I felt very moody, very dark. I felt, the human brain, or certainly the male brain, does not like to go backwards at speed. When you go from penthouse living, with it, like we had this huge glass atrium, overlooking the river, and, people would walk into the penthouse and it was just like, we had photo shoots there. We used to rent it out for photo shoots, and GQ models and all that sort of, like, fashion models would come and hire it as a venue and all that. Like it was pretty opulent living, right? And it was always the after party. So we'd go out and party and everyone would come back to the place, and you could have like 60, 70 people in that place and it was fine. So, to go from that, like, my sister's spare room was just dingy as shit. It was a tiny little bed, literally with all my stuff piled up in a big thing with just enough room to get in and hop onto the bed. So it was pretty dark. What got me through it is just one thing at a time, one day at a time. And just, I suppose, just in the back of my mind, thinking my best days are ahead of me. I'm still committed to the idea that my best days are ahead of me. I believe that that there will be something good that comes out of this, and that that there's definitely adventures still to be had. There's good times to be had. And also, I think too, the idea that one day I'll tell this story. Like, I know it's pretty low right now, but one day I'll be able to tell this story to my kids. One day I'll be able to tell this story to my friends, and and be able to empathize with someone who's doing it tough.
So there's three things that you mentioned there, and ultimately is that you said that greater days are ahead of me. So you had that optimism, that somehow, some way, things will be better, one day at a time, and then one day you can share the story and use it to inspire others to go on and do great things. And you've definitely gone on and done great things since then, which I've had the pleasure of being a part of, and it's been a privilege to be a part of that. What's the future for you personally? Like 10 years from now, 20 years from now, what is the future? What are the Daniel Priestley goals?
Well, the first thing is, this is the greatest time in history to be an entrepreneur. So there's more money in the world than ever before, and it's all sloshing around, like it's everywhere. The UK government's just pumped 280 billion pounds into the economy. It's the second largest amount of money and loans that have ever been pumped into the UK economy. The slavery abolition loan is the equivalent today of 300 billion pounds, and this is 280 billion pounds. So this is like basically the biggest injection of capital into the markets that's ever happened. So there's huge amounts of money everywhere. There's amazing technology that is democratized at the moment. It's in the hands of anyone who wants to use it. And it's very cheap, very affordable. So that's incredible. The global labor market has just massively opened up. Talented, amazing people from all over the world are looking for opportunities. And there are massive problems in the world that need solving. We're rethinking the way that we live, the way that we work, the way that we entertain ourselves, the way that we do finance, the way that we raise kids, the way we educate ourselves. Everything's up for grabs. So we're re-looking at every single industry. So the backdrop of this particular moment is that this is the greatest time that we've ever could be on the stage, right? So we're on the stage when all the action's happening. This is it. This is the moment. And me personally, I feel a drive to make the most of the moment, to do something that's true and authentic and real to me, that makes the most of this moment, to do the most with where I find myself and the resources that I'm surrounded by, and not in a pressurized way, but in a exciting, expansive way, that it's like, what a moment to be alive. So I feel like I want to make the most of the moment that we're in. But it's got to be authentic. It's got to be real. It's got to be, I'm not trying to force it. I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, Bitcoin's the thing, so I need to force myself to love Bitcoin, or I need to force myself to become a machine learning programmer or something like that. It's got to be real to me. It's got to be part of my origin, my mission, and my vision to that. So I created a game for myself 10 years ago, which was, I want to develop entrepreneurs who stand out, scale up, and make a dent in the universe. And there's ways to measure each of those things, but making a dent in the universe is that I'm instrumental in getting thousands of entrepreneurs to choose one of the United Nations global goals, to pick it, to take it seriously, and to go and do something in alignment with solving a problem on a scale of a United Nations global goal. And each little dent is like making a dent in one of those global goals, tackling a problem, doing something meaningful. So for me, what does success look like? It's like, can I get entrepreneurs to stand out, scale up, and solve meaningful problems in the world? Can I witness millions of little problems being solved? Can I witness thousands of entrepreneurs that I've helped them to go and do that? A week ago, one of our clients successfully lobbied the government to make the contraceptive pill freely available to any woman who wants it, with just by going into a chemist and going and getting, not having to go to a prescription, and just being able to privately go and get the pill. That's one little dent that I helped make, because she got that idea when she was on one of our programs. Another one of our clients just has donated 7 million sanitary kits to women living in refugee camps. We've just raised £20,000 to fund lawyers to tackle an environmental crisis and to hold, to lodge a legal case against, organizations that are polluting the environment. So there's just so many dents being made, and all of it kind of comes back to this central theme of stand out, scale up, make a dent. So for me, success is just as simple as that. I'm developing entrepreneurs that stand out, scale up, and make a dent in the universe. I'm measuring it, I'm watching it, I'm capturing it, I'm learning from it, and I'm relishing it and enjoying it. And basically, if I could still be doing that in 10 years' time, but doing it in an even greater scale, and maybe influencing even bigger companies or more budgets or more powerful leaders to get engaged in that, then that would be time well spent. That would be that would be a future that I'd be very happy to be living into.
I don't doubt it that it's going to happen, and you're being a big catalyst in that. And it sort of brings us back round to the book that we started talking about, right? It's How to Raise Entrepreneurial Kids. Is that it's not this perception of an entrepreneur is just someone that sort of makes loads of money and sits on a beach in Bali, and sort of laptop lifestyle, all that fun stuff. Whilst, yeah, lifestyle might be some people's preference, is that an entrepreneur is someone that can make a difference, that they can change the world. And I forget the person whose quote, it might have even been Steve Jobs, that said, the people that are crazy enough to think they can change the world do. I'm paraphrasing, but that is it. And these tools in this book, and I know we've not spoken too much about the book, so I didn't want to just parrot the book. People go and buy the book. I'll put the link in the show notes, go and buy the book. And what I think is phenomenal about this book as well is that whilst, How to Raise Entrepreneurial Kids, and it's sharing lots of lessons that are useful for your kids, they're really useful for you too. I've not even got kids. I read the book and I'm like, wow, there's some brilliant ideas in here for me. Forget the kids. I want these ideas for me. So I think that it is so true. And if people can come from that place where, like, once upon a time, people go, oh, well, I want to be an astronaut, or I want to do this. And they're cool things to do. And then people will go, right, well, I wanted to work I wanted to be a banker because I can earn lots of money. Whereas now you can be an entrepreneur and you can literally influence the world. You can have that impact on you. And it's first generation people are doing that. Elon Musk, yourself, and other great people that are first generation having that impact because they use the tools of entrepreneurship, the mindset, the skills, and the other elements that are a part of that to make a phenomenal difference because they're solving a problem.
Yeah, exactly. And the final chapter in the book says, what if your life's work, what if all the important things that you do in your life are eclipsed by the guidance that you give to a young person? And what if part of your life's work is to just shape a young person to think differently, to take on a meaningful problem and to solve it in a scalable and successful way? And I give 3 or 4 examples where parents who were successful in their own right actually were eclipsed by the fact that they raised a Richard Branson, or they raised a change maker. They raised someone who and it was the examples that I give actually are tiniest little examples. Like Richard Branson's mum, at age 6 or 7, she drops him off at the side of the road and says, "You got to make your way yourself to your grandmother's house. I'll see you there." And that for him was a defining moment. Michelle Mone, she had a Chinese meal with her grandmother, and she said, "Look, I know you've been born into a very difficult family, but you're destined for something. You're going to do something with your life." And she planted that little seed, and it was that little seed that led her to go and start, a big business and become a baroness. So it's those ideas that part of our life, I think part of our life's work, part of our life's mission is to positively shape someone that we come in contact with and have one powerful conversation with a young person.
I don't doubt that. And again, you talk about it in the book, is that I found fascinating is lots of people in the book that have gone on to become successful, they had that person believing them. Some, it was a parent, an aunt, an uncle, Michelle Malone, her grandmother, not Michelle Malone, was it Joe Malone? I can't remember, but it was the grandmother that said it, but that one person that believed in them enough. And for your dad, Andrew, maybe it was the microwave moment. There you go. That's what we can label it, the microwave moment. of that self-belief of going, oh, well, I can do this. This is possible. And so if anyone's listening to this, if that's something you can take from, there's plenty to take from this podcast episode, but installing that unwavering belief that someone can do something, because the words that you use, the language you use with anyone, but particularly young people, when they're like sponges, that could shape it's going to shape the rest of their life. But whether it's in a positive or negative way comes down to what it is that you actually say to them.
Yeah. Sometimes it can just be that smallest little interaction that changes the course of the whole future.
Well, hopefully this 45 minutes or so has been an interaction that changes the course of the future for some people. Daniel, thank you so much for being a phenomenal guest. Anyone that's listened to Daniel and wants to know any more about you, I'm going to put your link in the bio to How to Raise Entrepreneurial Kids, the book, and also to Dent, so people can find you and find out more about what you're up to with that. So yeah, thank you so much for
Thanks, Will.
part of the show. Guys, everyone that's been listening, thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this. Please review it and let us know what you think. Until next time, make it happen.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Make It Happen with Will Polston podcast. Make sure you join Will's free Facebook group, the Make It Happen community. Please support the show by subscribing on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or Google Play. Share this episode with at least one friend you think would benefit from it, and give Will a 5-star review wherever you download your podcasts. Until next time, make it happen.